Welcome to Talking New York Real Estate with Vince Rocco. Our show is all about the exciting world of real estate and in particular, how it relates to the luxury New York marketplace. But if you are not planning a real estate transaction in New York, we still have plenty of information you can use no matter where you are. Now, here's our show. Good morning, everyone. The podcast phenomenon has revolutionized the way we consume information, entertainment, and storytelling. Born from the fusion of radio and digital media, the term podcast emerged in 2004 as a blend of iPod and podcast to offer an on-demand, versatile platform for creators and listeners alike. With topics spanning virtually every interest from true crime and politics to wellness and niche hobbies, podcasts cater to diverse audiences. Their accessibility, requiring just a smartphone and a pair of headphones, has democratized content creation and given rise to countless independent voices alongside established media figures. This format thrives on its intimacy, often forging strong connections between host and listeners, making it a staple of modern media consumption. We're going to talk about all of it. And at the table with me today are Auntie Jacket from Compass, Matt Mellinger from Brown Harris Stevens, William McLarnon from Corcoran, and Anna Shagaloff from Brown Harris Stevens. And they join me now to discuss. But first, let me welcome my listeners and viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. I am Vince Rocco, and this is Talking New York Real Estate. So let's go behind the headlines and uncover the real story, the state of our industry.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back. So we're going to talk today. It's going to be a little different than most of our shows. We're going to have a little bit of real estate in there. However, this program, Talking New York Real Estate, is celebrating this week and next 400 episodes. That's quite a milestone. And I don't look like this on purpose, okay? It's exhausting and it's a whole bunch of things. But at the end of the day, I love it. We have fun. And the guests I've had over the past 10 years have been amazing. But we're going to celebrate that more next week. But today I want to get into the whole phenomenon of podcast. You know, they started about 15 years ago. We started about 10 years ago. But when I first picked up podcasting 10 years ago, I had no clue what it was about, nor did most other people. So we learned, we got our feet wet, we moved forward, and here we are 10 years later. But the podcast phenomenon is really a phenomenon. It's all over the place. I mean, if you take the trains, if you take the bus, if you're walking, I mean, people walk into you because they've got their earpods in and they're listening not only to music, which always used to be the number one priority, but they're listening to all different types of podcasts. So what I wanted to do today is to, kind of undress that a little bit and get into some of the podcasts that we listen to, some of the reasons why we listen, and why they're so important. So, Matt, let me start with you. What draws you, at times or often to, listen to podcasts over reading a book, over watching TV news, over radio? Because what we're also finding is a lot of people, aside from the traditional social media platforms, are getting their news from podcast. So what draws you to, the podcast phenomenon, and why do you listen?
I think it really comes down to people's attention spans getting shorter and shorter. Like you mentioned, a lot of people are getting their news, for example, through just by listening to things rather than, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were opening the newspaper and actually going through everything. I think there's a problematic angle to that, but we can get into that later today. But for me, it's really about easily digestible, relatively short sound bites that allow me to stay current.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. Gone are the days of the visual. Everybody wanted that visual something or other behind the person speaking. For example, this show has become very popular and has grown significantly on YouTube. So it's not only listening to what we have to say, now you're watching, just like you're watching a television program. And again, the audience is huge. William, so from your perspective, why do you pick podcasting over sitting down reading a book, watching a TV program, listening to a radio? I mean, when I was first recruited to do this, the producer, I first hung up on him because I didn't know what a podcast was. I said, whatever, gotta go. And I hung up. And then he called me back. He said, wait a minute. So you might not know what a podcast is, but do you ever listen to talk radio? And I said, I love talk radio, but I don't listen that much because I live in New York City. I walk and I don't drive that much anymore. It's just like talk radio. Okay. What about podcasting or listening to a podcast is intriguing to you?
So I think this has been trending like the last 10, 15 years. People's attention span have gotten shorter and shorter. So short videos, Instagram, all social media. So podcasts kind of fall into those categories because people now post them, people put them on YouTube, and it's just become relevant. It's fun to watch.
They're pulling quotes from whether the audio version of a podcast or the video version of a podcast, which is interesting along the lines what Matt just said. You can get short, little, quick sound bites and kind of get the gist of what's happening. Auntie, we talked about it before we went on the air, how, there's not always time to watch a podcast, but listening. Where do you listen to podcasts?
I mean, to be honest, I'm addicted. I listen every single morning when I'm
Talking New York Real Estate, of course, is his favorite show. We all know that.
It's always Talking New York Real Estate or some sort of real estate podcast. When I'm sending my emails or I'm negotiating a deal in the morning, I can't be reading a book at the same time. So I have these podcasts on. I'm listening to current real estate news in our market, national, commercial, residential, whatever. And I'm getting tidbits to help me close my deals. So while I'm sending my emails and working, I have noise in the background. I don't really watch the news, so that is my news.
And Anna, the same for you. So what, first of all, how do you pick your podcast? What podcast genre is special to you, more important to you? And where do you typically listen? Because I find every time I ask that question to people, it's all over the place. It's getting dressed in the morning. It's on the train going to work or to school, whatever.
I think the biggest thing about listening to a podcast is that you can feed your own narrative. And, typically when you're listening to the news or you're listening to something like a talk radio or something broader, you're getting an influx of different opinions. You can choose a podcast based on what you're actually interested in, what's going to support your beliefs and opinions. So people tend to kind of gravitate to that. I actually still read. I read on I don't read books as often as I'd like to, but I do read on my phone. I cannot multitask with a podcast. I'm very much in my head when I'm negotiating. I'm very much in my head when I'm thinking about what I need to do for the day, voice dictating texts and emails constantly, trying to remember to proofread them because it always comes out all crazy. When I do take the time to listen to a podcast, it's usually on YouTube and it's usually health or fitness related.
Now, you're on this podcast for almost...
And of course I listen to this podcast.
Of course you do. I was just going to say, you've been on this podcast for almost 9 years, 10 years, whatever it is out of the 10 years. And I used to be a regular panel member on the show here when we did a lot more of regular guests on the show. So from your perspective, when you're out there in our industry of real estate and you're bumping into co-brokers and other broker friends of ours in other companies, what do people ask of you as a participant or as a former regular participant on a podcast? I mean, they're intrigued that you're doing this, or anybody is doing it. But any particular thing that they want to know?
Well, I think the beauty of having the honor to be on a podcast and be seen by the general public is to be able to show your specific take on real estate, on life, and your personality. So I have had people reach out to me because they thought I would be a good fit for them, to help them sell or buy. I've had a lot of people, calling me to say, I'm buying for my child. I think you would be really great to hold her hand through this thing. Mm-hmm. So I've had a lot of that. And when people do know that I'm on the show, they'll ask how that came about. What's the dynamic off screen?
Why does Vince keep ignoring me? I keep trying to get on his show and he doesn't answer me back.
Well, a lot of people have said, can you introduce me? Can you
Right.
introduce me to Vince? And a few people I have.
You have.
But it's really just, how do you come up with what you say? And the truth is, you have to really believe what you're saying because it's a conversation. It's not like any of us have a script. So we need to be able to kind of tap into what we're talking about, our perspective of what we're talking about, and just be super honest, super open. And some people are going to agree and some people aren't, but you have to stay true to who you are. And that's all you can really do.
100%. Matt, so you host your own podcast here on the More Network. So tell us a little bit about what or why you're intrigued with podcasting, how you got started doing it, and do you find or see any benefit to what you're doing?
So just to back up for like 2 seconds, we are not a traditional podcast, and there's a reason behind why we did it this way. Brown Harris Stevens is branding it as an episodic miniseries because what we do
I
is
like miniseries.
Yeah, so we basically we were one of the first shows that came with a visual angle on the More Network versus the bevy of podcasts that we all host here are mostly. You hear it. It's not, the YouTube is secondary.
Right.
For us, we do sort of how I consume podcasts, which is, as I mentioned earlier, very easily digestible, short bites. And our episodes are like 90 seconds long. You could say that they're prime for TikTok, but for us, we're trying to cram as much information, education, or humor as we can into a 90-second bite, and then we push it out. And we have usually 12 to 15 episodes a season, and halfway through, we'll do something more humorous in the way of sort of like a mid-season teaser or trailer or sizzle reel. So I'm a little bit of an anomaly in the sense that I'm not subscribing to a million different podcasts. I actually like to get smaller, digestible pieces of different podcasts that are fed to me through my Instagram for the most part. So I'm hearing, sort of like a highlight reel from a 30-minute show that's boiled down to 90 seconds. I don't have the patience to sit and listen. I was also a child that grew up in the 90s with morning radio shows. That's what I found to be. I actually find those more interesting than podcasts because, as Anna mentioned, it's a very, very laser-focused angle where you're basically listening to what you want to hear. Whereas
You pick and choose, of course.
Whereas if you were doing like morning talk shows on radio, on Z100 or NPR, for example, there's a topic being discussed.
Z100.
Yeah, it's still. I mean, look, it's still on and it's still entertaining.
God.
But now that I'm older, it just feels a little bit dumbed down.
Yeah.
And it's
You're
not
that
as.
old to remember Z100, though. Wait a minute, I got to go right back on that.
I mean, I remember when KTU had the morning show.
KTU.
Yeah.
The morning show with RuPaul.
Now he's really aging all of us.
Remember, RuPaul did the
KTU.
morning
Of
show.
course,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so that to me was entertainment. This is, I would call it more infotainment. But the way that I consume podcast material is chopped up and spliced into just the key things that I need to know to follow along basically and stay current and stay on top of things.
Well, you cut up my show from time to time when
do.
you're a guest on it. No, but you do it brilliantly, and I like the little pieces.
Right,
don't know
I
what you
pick
call
out
them.
the the things that are going to make people want to listen to the whole episode and a hook, and then I basically put it into a sizzle reel and then put it out there, and people want to tune in because they want to see why did he say that or what were you commenting on.
Right. First of all, I hate the term podcast, and I've said that from day one. I hate the term podcast. So whenever people talk to me about this podcast, it's my show. The word I use is show, okay? Because I don't think it's a typical podcast. It goes on longer than most do, but I don't like that term. And as I said at the top of the show, it became the podcast became what it is on the old iPods. Remember the iPods we used to have, which were different than iPhones, and then the word broadcast. Why they merged both of them together, beyond me, but I don't like it. So you generally don't hear me talk about that word. But in any event, William, so as it relates to our industry of real estate, do you get anything out of information, as Matt said before, information tidbits or even longer conversations that help you in what you do every day as a successful real estate agent?
Absolutely. I mean, you might hear a bit of information like what's, a statistic about the market right now, or, in this last quarter, how many sales happened. I mean, there could be valuable information that helps it to be more clear to a buyer you're working with that how the state of the market. So,
yeah, most people, like I said, don't want to really read too much anymore. Books are one thing, but even in our industry, market reports or statistics, but they'll listen and they'll grab that information and they'll take it and run. Auntie, for you, I know you listen to a lot of real estate podcasts. So anyone in particular delight you more than others, and why?
I don't know if delight is the right word, but
Tell us the delights.
I love
Trying to be nice here.
I love information. So the one I listen to religiously is Urban Digs because it's very local to our market. They talk about what's happening in Manhattan, Brooklyn, how many deals were signed that week, how any trends they see, if there's lower supply, higher supply.
Their data is amazing.
So that's what I listen to, and for me it's easier to consume it listening. That information's easier to consume listening than reading it and seeing all these charts. Because if you go on their website, it's a bunch of charts. It looks like if you've been to a hospital, it looks like one of those heart readers.
They present, Urban Digs does present information in a way that is a lot easier to understand and then draw conclusions versus looking at the website, where unless you are a big data geek, you are just going to be completely overwhelmed with a lot of stuff they're putting out there.
Right. So their conversations are great because they just basically summarize the charts.
And I kind of agree with you, because I can go, back to the school days where, I was the type of student that, sure, you have a book to read, sure, you had to read a chapter or whatever before, but I always got, and even today, regardless of who's out there talking at me or to me, I always learn more when I listen than if I'm reading something. I might go back to the book and kind of recapture, some of the information, but I can sit there and absorb what people are saying to me more than if I had to read it because I get distracted and something, changes my, whatever. Hearing it, and that's why I've adopted to the genre of podcast, because it could be in my ear no matter where I am, but just listening to whatever's coming into my ear, it sticks there, it's memorable, and I don't really forget it. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. But how do you, other than real estate podcasting, how do you find other topics or other podcasts to listen to, or do you? I mean, there are more than just real estate podcasts. There are all kinds of topics out there. Are any of them of interest to you, Anna, or do you not really pay attention to them? Or what is the most important? The data you're getting, or just your industry?
I would have to say it depends on the day. It depends what I'm into in that moment. Industry stuff, I actually prefer to read. Because as I said, if something's being spoken at me instead of conversationally, I'm thinking about other things and I'm not processing it. So it has to be something that I'm sitting down, closing my eyes and listening to, and I don't have that kind of time. So I'll read Olshan, I'll read Urban Digs, I'll do all of that. I'm not a data geek, but it's easier for me because I know I have to focus on the words that I'm reading, and that's how I process it. And then I try my best to kind of, integrate it into a conversation so that's how it kind of sticks. I'm just that kind of a learner, more experiential than anything else. But there are commercials on, the health and wellness and fitness stuff. There are things that come up in my Instagram based on some of the things that I research. And if something strikes my interest, I will give it a shot. It's just I can't give it my full attention, so I kind of tend to not. I used to listen to music all the time. Now I don't even do that because I'm really just in my head about what's happening in that moment. But I'm always interested in healthy ways of eating, biohacking fitness. I'm a woman of a certain age now, so things that have
fabulous.
Things that have to do with me, and the conversations that I have with my clients, with my girlfriends, with my family. Things that interest me in those realms can feed into finding podcasts that feed into that.
If Anna is a woman of a certain age now, what the hell do I say? I'm over the hill? Really?
You are not.
We're not. Okay, we're going to take a break. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. Don't go anywhere. We have so much more to go. We'll be right back.
The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
All right, everybody, we are back. So we're talking about podcasting, why we listen, some of the topics of the different podcasts that we like to listen to or not. And, there's so many that, as Anna mentioned, health and wellness and news information, real estate industry. But what I want to ask all of you, because before, podcasting or podcasting in your ear, as I call it, really kind of took over our life, because I really think it has. We all used to be addicted to music and listening to music, right? Constantly listening to music. I mean, you'd see people bopping away on the subway and walking down the street, sometimes walking into you because they're paying attention to the music lyric and not you. But Has podcasting, data-driven podcasting, replaced music in people's ears?
I'm going to just go out on a limb here and sort of give you an idea of how I digest podcasts. I'm actually listening to music. I have my earbuds in probably between 6 to 10 hours a day.
Oh, Lord.
So in the event, if I have a call come in, I obviously tap and go. But I'm listening to music, constantly streaming. My Spotify playlists I have some of that are like 39 hours long, but I'm watching podcasts with subtitles. So I'm commuting to work, listening to music,
So you're
watching.
reading.
I'm
In
reading
essence,
it. I'm
you're
not
reading.
because if someone is in my ear, like you said, I am not paying attention. So for me, music is background noise, and I came from a finance background where I was just number crunching all day long with 6 giant monitors in front of my head, and I would be listening to these 2-hour-long sets of music in my headphones and just grinding away. So that's how I focus. For me, that's the easiest way to do it. And I don't religiously subscribe to certain podcasts, except for this one. But for me, it's more about the personalities. So, for example, I follow a lot of different comedians on Instagram. Whenever they're on a podcast, they have their 90-second sort of pitch to tune into that episode. I'm watching all the highlights. And for me, it's more humor and it's funny. I'm not getting my news from podcasts because I think a lot of it, as I mentioned earlier, is problematic because it's opinion driven and it's not necessarily fact.
Who's your favorite comedian?
Right now, I'm really into Chris DiStefano. He's super funny. He sort of sits adjacent to. He's basically like Matt Rife without the scandal, but he's like awesome. And Jessie Kirson, big fan of her, and Matt DeLeon. Great. Like basically all the ones that are leveraging TikTok and Instagram to draw their audience in, but they're constantly being featured on all these podcasts and they're funny. But I don't have the ability to sit there through 40 minutes of dialogue.
Exactly.
I just want to say, what did you say that was the best thing you said in those whole 40 minutes? Give it to me in 90 seconds.
That I can do. That I can process. But sitting, like you just said, I mean, sitting through like a full-on podcast where like if you zone out or think about something else for a minute, you're completely lost and you have to like take the time to like get
But even while I'm working, like some will think it's kind of weird, but I have my music on a very low volume if I'm like showing an apartment to somebody. It's just my background noise.
It's really
like I always have it on.
That's hard.
This is really for sure. But it's really so highly individual because again, I was joshing before the show. We had a consultant in here recently who suggested that this program get cut back from an hour to whatever, and I thought
ridiculous.
Not going to happen.
What?
Okay,
we need an hour and a half.
Yeah, we need more. We
need more time.
overtime.
Well,
we need the after show.
But you see, but this is my point. When I look at the numbers, whether they're the YouTube numbers or whether they're the traditional podcast numbers, through the years, okay, I don't get a sense that people don't have the time to listen to an hour real estate podcast. In fact, I think it's the opposite. Because of the topic of the show, New York City-based real estate, people around the world, I posted something the other day on Instagram about the top 10 countries.
Unbelievable. Nepal.
I'm like, okay, so where are these people coming from? And large numbers. Okay? So an hour for certain programs, I guess, or shows, as I call it, does work. But I agree with you, Anna. Sometimes, I'm in fifth gear, like all day long, running here, running there, thinking about this, thinking about that. Who am I going to talk to now? What about whatever? I don't always have that luxury of time, but I'm always interested in seeing that there are people who do, I guess, because they do listen and they listen in great numbers. William, has podcasting or data replaced music in your ear for you, or is it 50-50, or is it not?
I think, me personally, it's probably like 25-75. I do like listening to music. It just helps me with the rhythm of everything. But yeah, podcasts are very valuable and relevant. And
what about when you're working out, music or podcasting?
Music, I was doing podcasts for a while, and I might get back to it just because it's it gets some valuable current data in the market. But yeah, it's a mix.
See, when I was working out, and I need to get back to it, I know, but when I was working out, I was, well, really, I said at the top of the show, I don't look like this on purpose, okay? Music was better than podcasting for me when I was working out. You get into a groove, you get into a pattern,
rhythm,
and the same playlist, a rhythm, right? The same playlist all the time kind of gets you pumped up, especially when I was spinning. Oh my God, that
Oh
was
yeah.
all music.
You need a
driven.
drum beat when you're working
You need
out.
a drum beat when you work out. Auntie, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, I mean, Blue Sky, I can go on and on and on and on. This is where most people are getting information from today, either right or wrong, opinionated or not. How do you relate those apps to a traditional podcast or data-driven, something in your ear all the time? Is it the visual of TikTok? Is it the visual of Instagram that makes better sense to people? Or how do you look at all of that? Because social media, by the way, has taken off in the last X amount of years beyond anyone's recognition. I mean, I can't even believe where we are with social media, good and bad. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I get any data from Instagram, but you get visual there. I see new products coming to our market. I see, I don't know, lifestyle tips, workout, information. I think on Facebook, actually, a lot of people repost podcast or YouTube videos, as well as articles and other information. So I'm made aware of podcasts on Facebook versus Instagram, where you're seeing kind of just these short clips.
Well,
of whatever people
Instagram
wanna
is nothing but a
post.
picture library. You can't get real good content like you can on
Right.
Facebook. And then people always argue with me when I'm teaching my social media class. I always get pushed back. Well, Facebook, is for old people. I'm like, no, it is not. By the way, you're correct. It's interesting where people are finding podcasts, right? They find it on my Facebook page. They find it, wherever else I may be posting it on LinkedIn. More than if I tell them go to a podcast app, they're like, "What is that?"
Right.
And when I hear that, I think, do I live on Mars? What is a podcast app? Really? Spotify, Apple, iTunes. They're like, where do I find that? I get emails every week. I hear your podcast is great. Where can I listen to it? When did you get your podcast? Right? Not that difficult, but they don't know. So I go out of my way to put it on social media, and they will click on that. And the amount of views I get from Facebook, as you indicated, or wherever, LinkedIn, they're listening there. It registers back to the podcast app, but that's where they're getting, at least in my world, right? Where do you listen to your podcast?
If I'm listening like start to finish, in the rare moment that I do that, Spotify. Yeah, I'm not. No offense, I'm not getting my podcast updates from Facebook.
No.
It's usually coming from Instagram, just because that's my
that's
my
snippet
platform
of
of
internet. Yeah,
right. And I'm seeing, do I want to devote 40 minutes to this? Yes or no.
Right.
They're giving me like a 90-second pitch for me to tune in. More times than not, I'm moving on to the next thing. But yours is educational, informational, and a little bit of commentary all rolled into one. So
And it's often people we know.
right, and it's people we know. So if I see, Louise Phillips Forbes is going to be on next week, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely tuning in. I can't wait to see what she has to say about this. But for us, it's the familiarity that makes us want to actually hear what our colleagues have to say. If it's a complete stranger giving me their opinion on something that they read on CNN, I don't care. It's not something that I want to tune into.
Right.
I will listen to their hot take that takes about 35 seconds. But I'm not going to spend 40 minutes of my life listening to somebody that I don't know talk about something that's not super relevant to me.
But let's be real. I mean, how many people can do that 40 minutes start to finish? Like, you are pausing and restarting throughout the day.
Are you?
If I am listening to something, a 40-minute podcast can take me 2 days to get through.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's like a book.
It's kind of like a book, but to your point and to what we were saying about people I guess there are a couple of things that I listen to when it's somebody I know that's doing it. A friend of mine, Emily Hickey, just launched a YouTube series on marketing. She is unbelievably smart, unbelievable, and she's a dear, dear friend, and I can listen to her voice because I feel like she's talking to me.
Let's bring her on the show.
And she's in Colorado. She used to be here. I sold her place.
Of course you did.
Of course I did.
Of course you
But
did.
I mean, she just started this, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so good, and it's so informative, and it may not relate necessarily to real estate, but you pick and choose what you want to process that can relate to you. And then there's like Amy and TJ, their podcasts, they're friends of
Love
mine,
it.
so I do listen to them because I want to support them.
Especially when they're running.
When their morning run, yeah. So there are things that I listen to when it's something that I'm feeling like super connected with, but I cannot get through. And when I see that I'm kind of like veering towards something else, then I pause and then I rewind and I'll go back to it later. If I'm invested in it, I want to hear every word and I want to process
See, I
every word.
try to, and it doesn't always work, but I try to. If I know I'm going to listen to a 40-minute podcast, 30-minute, 1 hour, whatever it is, I try and allocate that time when I know I'm not going to do anything else. It doesn't always work because the phone will always ring or a text will always come in, and that's always a drama in our industry. But I try to do that because I don't like the breakage of, it's like a television show. Like sometimes you watch a TV, oh, I'm so tired, I'm going to go to bed, I'll pick it up tomorrow. And it's kind of like you got to go back to where you began and do that again.
Yeah, you have to get back into that mindset.
You got to get back to the mind. I mean, I get it because I do it a lot. I try not to. I try and find the time. But speaking about length of podcasts, because as I said before about our consultant suggesting that we cut this back from an hour to whatever, 45 minutes, what do you all think about length of time for a pod? What is the ultimate right time, if there is even an answer to that question, of how long a podcast should be? Auntie.
I actually was listening to a podcast this past weekend with a group of friends in a car, and I couldn't listen to it. It was just like chitter chatter going on and on. So
Well,
we
some of it
switched
is,
it.
yeah.
So I think it depends on the podcast. If it's information, I think it could, and you're learning, it could go on for hours. I think if it's people talking about their hike or what they do at the gym for 5 hours,
Yeah,
I mean,
no.
no one's going to listen to that.
No, I agree.
I'm stuck every morning, I have to say this, listening to Boomer and Geo because my husband is obsessed. So every morning I'm hearing these like football and basketball, like sometimes they're actually really funny, but it's not the kind of thing that I'm processing. But I am forced to listen to this where I want to be listening to music when I'm getting ready. And if my husband's home, I'm listening to Boomer and Geo. I have no choice in the matter.
I'm not even going to go there this week with the game of
It's
this
hilarious.
past Sunday with the Chiefs and the Bills. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about being torn with who you root for. It's like, oh my God, I was in tears. I was having another martini. I can't even get over this game. In any event, length of time.
I mean,
I mean, shorter is better. Most people will
yeah,
say.
if I haven't been clear by now,
No,
shorter is
right.
always better for
Short.
me. I have the attention span of a squirrel. It's just not in my nature to. I mean,
there with you.
unless I'm
I think we all do.
Unless I'm sitting on an elliptical machine for 45
Right.
minutes.
Well, that's.
And I have to watch it. I can't, if I listen only, it's just not going to stick. I'm not going to pay attention to anything. That's why music for me works. It's background noise.
Right.
And if I'm doing anything, I'm listening to music and I'm watching a podcast on YouTube with subtitles while I'm doing cardio because I just need something to pass the time. And at least I feel like I'm being productive while I'm doing it. But for me, it's more entertainment based. Obviously, it's not as informational based unless I'm tuning into you. So for me, I think anything longer than an hour is probably way too long just because I can't be on a cardio machine for more than an hour.
No,
But I personally, I like those 7 to 10 minute one and done. You know, it's very, the hard part is picking and choosing what you're putting out there in that short amount of time, which is why it's actually quite difficult for us to produce our show because it's visual, it's audio, and it's only 90 seconds. So we have to basically come up with the concept and squeeze everything into 60 to 90 seconds, basically, which is not easy to do. It's easier to talk for an hour.
Well, it is, but I hear your point. Look, we all can probably say that exercise in the morning is probably standard, so you're listening to music more in the morning than not. What is the best time of the day then to move on to the next, which would be a podcast? I mean, is it afternoon? Is it evening? Is it when you're just going to and from? In our business, we're running all day long at times, or sometimes working from home or whatever. When is the optimal time to listen to a podcast? Again, music probably in the morning when you're exercising or in the evening. A lot of people work out in the evening. When is the best time to listen to a podcast? Or is there? I mean, I look at my numbers and I can tell sometimes when the show is first posted, and it's posted from my editor in London. And so they're ahead of us by 5 or 6 hours, whatever it is. And the numbers on Thursday morning when I first look are staggering. And I think that's a morning listenership in Europe anyway, right? Or anywhere that's 5 hours difference than us.
On the way to work, that's what I think. Like for us, it's like our first appointment. If we have to take the subway or just you have your headphones in. So I would say, while you're on your way to work, on your way home, or while you're at the gym, those three things.
That's kind of what I see from most people. It's like when they're going to or from. When I go visit the family and I'm on the train for an hour up to Westchester, there's a podcast going on in my ear because why not? I'm not going to get interrupted because I'm on the train. I'm sitting there. I'm focusing on what I'm listening. I might be scrolling through something else, but not paying attention to that. That works for me.
When my workouts are generally music based, but I will tell you, I had the best run listening to the DNC during listening to Michelle and Barack when it was just so charged, and I just ran and ran and ran and ran. I've never done that before, but I was so pumped. I almost wanted to listen to it again because it just kept.
Are you
it just
fired
kept
up?
Me, I was
Ready to
so
go?
I was so fired up, and I ran for and I don't typically like to run on a treadmill, but it was crappy weather or whatever. I was on that treadmill for I don't even know how long, but I was so pumped. That's the one and only time that I've ever listened to something other than music at a workout.
But right, and again, to our point before, sometimes there are going to be those very highly charged, very inspirational speakers or whatever you want to call them that will get in your ear, and it's like, okay, just hold on, I'm listening, okay, and I'm not giving that up at the moment. Yeah. Just like if you're watching them on TV news or whatever, you're thinking, all right, keep going, because as I've said through the years, there are speakers and there are speakers, okay. And the good ones are phenomenal. And you learn that skill, I think, from early on. I worked at IBM for 13 years at the start of my career. And I think I learned what good speaking is all about, or how to listen to a good speaker. Because most people who stand up in front of an audience just can't do that. It's called being inspirational and really good at what you do. Matt, so, with all of this, is there any particular, storytelling is one thing, but is there anything that really keeps you coming back to a podcast, regardless of the length? Is there any particular topic, any particular person? You mentioned comedians before. Anything that keeps you coming back time after time after time to a particular podcast or show, as I call it?
I will answer very simply, no. I'm not, if I was a true crime documentary fanatic, I understand the cult following behind those types of podcasts where they're, doing like murder mysteries and stuff
Only
like that.
Murders in the Building.
Yeah, great.
Show.
But that's a great show.
Right.
If that was a real podcast, I probably wouldn't tune in.
Right.
But
no.
it's a great show.
Yeah.
But for me, I follow the personalities that tend to appear on podcasts. I don't follow the podcasts themselves. So if I'm
Explain. That's a good
like
point.
the comedian angle. They're constantly on. Or Call Her Daddy was it still is a phenomenon. But they would always have guests on the podcast. So would I tune in every single episode? Absolutely not. If there was someone on there that I was interested in hearing, of course. But it was usually a derivative Instagram account pushes me towards it, or it's someone that I follow already that happened to be appearing on the podcast. Then I want to tune in and hear what they have to say. Because I don't, it's just, like I said, it's just not something where I'm subscribing and religiously tuning in every single week. I do miss a couple episodes of this one every now and then.
Shame on you.
I know.
Shame.
I know. But again, it's more the familiarity of the faces.
And that's what I was going to say. And a good point. You miss a couple of episodes, and that's perfectly fine. The good news about the difference, rather, between podcasting and talk radio of the day is if you missed a talk radio episode, gone and forgotten. They never used to repeat that stuff. Podcast, you download at your will. You download when you have the time, when you want to listen to it. If you want to listen to it a second time, you can. That's the difference. We got to take a quick break. No one's going anywhere. We'll be right back with more podcast talk right after these messages.
This podcast is supported by the More Network, powered by Brown Harris Stevens. Real estate touches every aspect of our lives, from design and architecture to investing and the economy. Now there's a way to get all your real estate information in one place. The More Network. With more than 20 podcast and webcast series, the Mastery of Real Estate Network is powered by Brown Harris Stevens, one of the country's most distinguished brokerages. Discover advice from notable entrepreneurs, compelling topics, and access to top global real estate experts. Subscribe to their YouTube and Apple podcast channels by visiting getmorenetwork.com.
Okay, here we go. We are back, and I just want to point out that William had to leave urgent client information. We are in the real estate business, so we all know what that's about. So he had to go and take care of a burning situation. But we always love William. He'll be back eventually in the next few weeks. Anyway, when I'm teaching my social media class, we talk about branding and how to find out who you are as a person. What is your why? What are your beliefs? Because in order to get yourself out there in a professional way and in a memorable way, as I like to say, people have to know who you are, relate to you, and think that you're memorable, and not, because you have a big ego, but just because you're a person who people want to come back to and talk to and listen to. It's called branding. And until you can do that, you're really just one of, 1 million fishes out there doing what we're trying to do every day in real estate. But I bring up branding because when it comes to podcasting and when it comes to TV news, when it comes to radio programming, again, just like going to the grocery store, you tend to buy the same gallon of milk every week, the same bread brand every week, same butter, same eggs, whatever, because you've got branding ingrained in your head. Oftentimes, if you're like me, you're walking out the door singing a commercial jingle that you just saw on television while you're watching the news in the morning, okay? And it's like, go away. I don't need that.
KARS, Cars for Kids.
There you go, whatever. But I don't even want the product, but I like the jingle, right? So you just kind of remember the jingle and it sticks with you, right? Yeah, that's one.
Sorry.
That could be one. But it's the same. I believe it's the same with podcasting. You tend to go back at least to the same genre, if it's not the same show, to listen to get information. Does it affect your perspective or your decisions on what you need to do during that day within our industry? For example, if you're listening or were just recently listening to a real estate podcast, does it change how you approach your day at all? Or your evening, whenever you're listening?
I don't know if it would change my day, but maybe I'd get a tidbit from the podcast that I would use throughout my day.
Okay.
Or some piece of information.
And do you tend to go back to the same host or the same show because you like that show or you like that brand or you like what you're hearing whenever you listen to the show? And it doesn't have to be regularly or every day.
If I go back to a certain person, it's because I like the way they speak. If I go back to a certain podcast for information, it's because I think the data is great, if that makes sense. But sometimes for like motivational podcast, you may like a person. For example, Ryan Serhant, right? He does all these podcasts. He has a following because people like his brand, the way he speaks.
Well, I was kind of getting to that angle, so thank you for that. I mean, when you talk about a lot of the real estate shows that are out there, when you talk about a lot of people like a Serhant or a Steve Gold or whomever, they've got a certain brand that they have spent years cultivating and building, and it works for them in spades, okay? They've become enormous successes for a reason. Now, podcasting is not as popular as a television program in for the most part, but branding is still important. Finding out who you are and presenting that to the outside world in a credible way, I think, makes a difference. Matt, we talked about during a commercial break how some social media platforms are so opinionated and so filled with one person's opinion, that being the author of that site. How do you feel about that in social media, and how do you think that relates to podcasting? Because we do know there are hosts on podcasts that have strong, Joe Rogan, I mean, I can go on and on and on with strong opinions.
Yeah, I mean, that's also part of the reason why I'm not tied to or subscribed to specific podcasts, is because at the end of the day, the vast majority of it is opinion. It's not fact. And I think the problematic angle that no one really talks about is that people walk away from these podcasts thinking that they learned something when they could be totally misguided based off of someone else's biased opinion.
100%.
And for me, like Urban Digs, that's all fact. They're basically just interpreting charts.
Yeah.
Totally fine. Totally understand why people tune in. It's easier to, get a full synopsis of what happened in the market. But if you're going for, Joe Rogan is a great example. He's a polarizing figure with very, very strong opinions. And a lot of the guests that he has on his podcast are not necessarily the most credible sources for.
But does it really matter in his case?
It doesn't, because it's personality. But there's a lot of people that come away from those episodes after hearing them believing certain things that are not necessarily true. And that's the one issue that I have with a lot of podcasts is that anybody can pick up a microphone and get on Spotify and get on their soapbox and I mean, tell a story.
Right.
Whether or not the story is totally rooted in fact or not. I mean, look at the political landscape right now. We have so many radicalized individuals given a platform to sometimes blatantly lie on national television,
Sometimes.
and people are actually believing it. Like that's sort of I mean 20 or 30 years ago this stuff was unheard of, but I think the rise of the podcast and the ability to essentially give yourself a platform generally for free to say whatever you want,
It validates
communicate
that
it to the
information.
masses. It gives the veneer of factual storytelling when in reality a lot of it is anything but. And I think that's sort of the biggest problem with sort of the oversaturation of podcasts. We always joke like everybody has one at this point, right?
It's very true, but I think some of the bad ones, or the very 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 opinionated ones, can validate bad ideas, bad thoughts, and just push things that are just not good for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. And I think it's really dangerous, especially when you have a younger set that's kind of growing up with podcasts as being more on the forefront, speaking as a mother. But I do sometimes tune into the opposition just to kind of get a glimpse into what they're saying and what the perspective is that they're being fed. I know what I know. I believe what I believe. And I'm not flaky about that. So when I listen to this stuff, it's not that I'll ever change my perspective, but I think it's really important to get into other people's perspectives and try to understand or at least recognize where they're coming from, not necessarily agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, very good point, valid points on both your side. But and not that I want to get political, but oftentimes we have bad opinions being said on podcast, certainly in social media, that kind of get out there in ways that are just detrimental to people, to society, and yet when you look at the audience of these podcasts or of some social media platforms, they're off the charts.
Yeah.
Off the charts. And I have to wonder, I've always been somebody who likes information and data, but real information, valid information that makes sense, that I can learn from, propaganda, conspiracy theory kind of stuff. It's very big out there, but that's not what I want to listen to, nor anything I want to tune into. So I will tune out of that stuff. And so when I look at podcasts, when I look at social media, when I look at any of the platforms on social media, I would hope that people would do the same thing. I don't think they do. I think that whatever grabs them for the moment, maybe because they don't have the level of education to meet what the host is saying, they just kind of lap onto it and just say, hey, great, whatever. I think opinion marketing, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's on a social media platform, is really detrimental and really, really kind of bad. I don't know how we can fix that, but I want to get to TikTok for a minute because, I kind of think of TikTok sort of as an open platform in the podcast arena. I think TikTok is hilarious. I mean, I tend to look at it, on a daily basis just to kind of laugh and ease my cuckoo days sometimes because you see silly things and people falling over and falling into holes, and it's kind of like being knocked over by a truck. I'm like, who films this stuff and why, right? But there's also a side of TikTok that can be very, persuasive and very political and a lot of things that people also hook into. And I have to wonder, where are we going with all of this? Where are we going forward with podcasting, with social media, and why? What's your opinion, Matt?
I mean, I think
we can go in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to answer that kind of question like that. But I think back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier is we are now at a point where it's complete oversaturation of podcasts.
But I believe it's shaping our culture and opinions.
Yes, it is, for better or for worse.
Well,
and unlike the news, which take it with a grain of salt, has to be fact checked a lot of the time before it's put out. And if they get something wrong, they have to issue they redact and then they restate. Podcasts don't have that luxury of being able to do that.
Right.
So I don't really see a future beyond this sort of oversaturated anything goes environment until there is some sort of oversight which I don't think it's impossible. It's impossible.
Well, freedom of speech,
But
you really can't have that oversight.
Yeah,
that
I mean,
we would like to see.
And for TikTok, I mean, your For You page is different than my For You page. It's probably very similar to your For You page. It's basically fitness, fashion, and slapstick comedy. Like that's basically it. Bloopers. And for me, it's
some cooking stuff.
And a little, making food, like any cooking, the really cool ASMR.
Mine's about cooking and podcasting.
Yeah.
That's all that, nothing else is important.
Yeah, and then every now
I do
and
very
then.
little real estate on it. I think it's boring.
Yeah, I actually am hoping for maybe a return to the basics. Like
What are those basics?
so, like for example, now we have. They don't really do like cooking podcasts, right? But they do.
That's hard to do.
They do recipe. They basically do recipes, but it's ASMR based. So the microphones are really tuned in on all the noises, and it's sort of soothing for a certain select demographic. But for example, people have been pushing for the Food Network to go back to old-fashioned cooking shows. To do what.
Just hear that, people. I've been boasting about this for weeks and months and years.
I want to watch music videos on MTV
Yeah.
for
Right,
half an
here we go.
hour.
Well, there's always an oversaturation of something until
Right.
something
I
changes.
think
So,
we're already so far in one direction.
Well, these
I'm
food
actually
competition shows
anticipating
match the mentality of this country. Sorry.
Right, but I think we're going to start see the pendulum swing back in the other
Yeah,
direction
I
soon
agree.
because people are going to get overstimulated, bored, and the podcast might go the way of Vines. Remember Vines? Vine was
remember
pre-TikTok.
I mean, to that point, I see younger people reading actual books on the subway now. Like they just want something that's different. They
Right.
want to change it up. So,
Soon you're going to have Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
that's why
picking
fashion
up
comes back.
VCRs in vintage stores.
Yeah.
The way that I picked up a record player, when I
Boy,
was.
he's
we
really
just got some
dating
record
himself.
players,
He's not
yeah.
even that old.
Well, I was just talking about
But
today.
you're right.
Yeah, I was
You're
talking about today on
100%
social media. Like
right.
I said, we're taping today, and I thought to myself, I'm like, do the younger generations even know what we're taping
Yeah.
means?
No.
Because there's no.
I'll never forget the first time my kids saw a cassette tape.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, let's sit down and discuss this.
My youngest
a thing.
nieces and nephews are 21. Okay, they're triplets. My brother Michael had triplets, and Emery had triplets. 21. Okay, that's not that young. It's not that old. It's like right there. I ask them questions. Sometimes they look at me like, "Huh? Do you know who this singer is? Or do you know who this order? What? Do you know that?" Or I'll post something on social media, and one of them will text me saying, "What is that?"
Right.
And I think.
There was a famous one this week.
I like it though because it kind of gets me back in touch with who
What's
I am,
current
or
and what's current.
Exactly, and I'm like, okay, I get it. They're adorable, but I'm like, they don't know anything. They don't know
anything, and they're creating a language that does not make any sense.
Well, again, and that's why I say sometimes we have to be mindful of what we put out there or what we're consuming because, whether it makes sense or not, I don't know, but there are people out there who don't have that capacity to kind of figure it out or what makes the most sense. One of the things we try to do on this broadcast for the last 10 years is just be accurate. Just be factual.
Yeah.
Just be informative. And I hear all the time from brand new agents, whether it's in this company or anywhere else, they go out of their way to either email me or text me saying, hey, you don't know me, and I love this, so please keep it coming. You don't know me, but I listen to your show every week because I'm learning more by listening to your show, talking to all the experts who you have on, than I do in real estate class or did in real estate class. And I'm like, of course, it's like college.
It's real
What did you learn in
time.
college?
It's real time stuff. Yeah.
It's real-time stuff. It's practical, on-the-job training stuff.
Exactly.
They hear from the experts about what makes this industry work. I get that. I mean, that's always how I've been. Again, listening versus reading. You could read a book. We all go to college. We all get educations. But what are you going to do with that education until you go and work somewhere in your chosen field and make it work for you?
Learn experientially.
Right.
Yeah, like I do. Yeah.
Feet on the street, walk the walk, talk the talk, whatever the hell the expression is. Ante, close us out with your thoughts on podcasting in general. Do you think they should stay? Do you think they should go? Do you think they should get better improved? I mean, what is your opinion on the overall concept or phenomenon of how podcasting has taken over our world?
I mean, I think they're here to stay. I mean, most of America is driving in a car 4 hours a day, right? So they're listening to stuff. If a family doesn't want their kids to be listening to KTU or Z100, they're listening to something in the car. Politics, I don't know, religion,
Right.
any motivational stuff. So I think that people are used to podcasts, and it's an alternative to radio. So they're here to stay.
What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I think, the lid is off the box. I think there's a non-censorship, a freedom of speech that people are finding liberating. And, I mean, I don't think there's any pulling it back. And I don't think there's any censorship that's going to come through right now.
I 100% agree with both of you said, but I mean, let's see where the future takes us. Your thoughts, final thoughts on this topic?
I completely agree with Anna and with Auntie. I think that they're definitely here to stay. I think that how in vogue they are will come and go. I think there is sort of a push for, not to date myself, but nostalgia type things these days where people are trying to go back to,
It's like fashion, it recirculates.
Yeah, everything comes full circle every 15 to 25 years. So, we're seeing the things that I enjoyed as a child growing up in the 90s come back into fashion. So you see people reading books again. They might, everything just might swing in the opposite direction. But yes, in general, they are here to stay. I just, if I haven't been clear at this point, have a little bit of an issue with the fact that it's giving anyone and everyone a platform to speak publicly, and the reach is, there's no limit. It can go, something goes viral, and the wrong thing goes viral. It's just, it's a little scary to me.
It's speak versus spew.
Right.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say in closing it out too. I agree with everything all of you said. I don't think there's any turning back. I think we're onto something, whatever that something is, only to move forward. And when I read things and I hear things about traditional media, cable news networks, regular, networks like ABC, CBS, and NBC, losing audience, drastically losing audience, and people being put out of work at all of these networks. The reason for that is because of social media. The reason for that is because of podcasting. The reason for that is because people, even though we don't like to think that, or we don't, get their news from social media and get their news from podcasting. And it can not be the right news because, as you say, and as I agree, everyone now has the right to be a podcast host, whether you're qualified or not, whether the topic makes sense or not. You can just get out there and spew what you want to talk about, and people grab onto that, hold on to that, and run with it. And that's what causes a lot of concern. But in the meantime, we here at Talking New York Real Estate try not to do that. We talk about fact, information, education, and hopefully people enjoy that. And we're going to come right back with my thoughts for the day. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back with my thoughts for this week. The podcasts have developed a symbiotic relationship with social media, applying its reach and influence. Social media platforms like Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn serve as critical tools for podcast promotion, audience engagement, and content expansion. Hosts often share highlights, behind-the-scenes clips, or key takeaways from episodes, creating bite-sized content that captures attention and drives traffic to the full podcast. Listeners, in turn, use social media to discuss episodes, share their favorite moments, and build communities around shared interest. This interplay allows podcasts to tap into the viral potential of social media, reaching new audiences who may not actively seek out long-term audio content. Additionally, social media enables real-time feedback, fostering a two-way dialogue between creators and their audience. As social media and podcasts continue to evolve, their integration strengthens, creating a dynamic ecosystem for storytelling, education, and connection. And a programming note, stay tuned for next week's show, which will be a good one. It's going to feature some of my original panel members interviewing me as we remember 10 years of broadcasting and our 400th episodes in this genre. And that's our podcast for today. Thanks to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or TikTok at Vince Rocco. And John Wooden says, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am very grateful, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.